Welcome to the deep dive. Our mission, as always, is to take some pretty complex stuff, break it down, and give you the key insights so you walk away knowing more. Today, we're diving into the world of GI endoscopy. And our source material, it's really interesting. It comes from excerpts of a video called HEC 1472 Lesson 11A1 Hemostatic Devices Through the Scope Clips movie. This is from Dr. Raju's YouTube channel, which has some great educational content. Okay, so let's get into it. We're zeroing in on this device called the Through the Scope Clip, or TSC. Tiny tool, huge impact. If you thought endoscopy was just cameras going down, well, these little clips are where the action happens.
That's absolutely right. TSCs are, well, primarily hemostatic devices. They stop bleeding. But what Dr. Raju's material really highlights and what we want to explore is just how versatile they are. Their use goes way beyond just stopping a bleed.
Right. It sounds like they have a whole range of applications, even some surprising ones. And we're not just talking about what they do, but really getting into how the technique needed to make them work properly inside the body.
Exactly. We'll look at their main jobs, then some, let's call them secondary uses, like anchoring and marking, and then, crucially, the very specific three-step process for operating them.
Perfect. Let's start with the basics then. Segment 1, the primary missions. Looking at the device itself, the source shows it. It has a handle, kind of like other endoscopic tools, right? Thumb ring, slider, but the clip on the end, that's the key part.
Precisely. And its main jobs, the most common reasons you'd reach for one, fall into two big categories. First, and this is the number one use, is control of bleeding, hemostasis.
So active bleeding, you see it, you clip it.
You got it. If there's an ulcer bleeding, or maybe a small tear from the procedure itself, you deploy the clip to pinch that tissue shut and stop the flow. It's often an immediate emergency type use. The second main category is closure of defects. This is a bit different from stopping active bleeding right now.
Okay, how so?
Well, you might close a defect prophylactically. Say you've removed a large polyp, leaving a deep base. You might clip that base to prevent delayed bleeding that could happen hours or even days later. Ah, so it's preventative.
Right. Or you might be closing a deep injury, maybe one caused during the procedure, to prevent it from turning into a full perforation, a hole through the gut wall.
So it's like internal stitches almost to keep things sealed up after the work is done.
That's a good way to think about it. And the most critical use in this category, closing an existing perforation. If there's already a hole, getting a clip on it quickly can sometimes mean avoiding major emergency surgery. So hemostasis and defect closure, those are the core functions.
Now, the material mentions newer, maybe better clips. If these TSCs work for closing defects, why the need for something else? What are their limits?
That's a really good point. It comes down to the through the scope part. These clips have to be small enough to fit down the narrow channel inside the endoscope.
Okay, so size is a limitation. Exactly. For simple bleeds or smaller defects, they're great. But for really large defects or tissue that's very thick or scarred, a standard TSC might not have enough clamping force or just might not hold long enough. They can sometimes slip off, and that's where the newer devices, often called over-the-scope clips or OTSCs, come in. They're much larger because they actually fit over the tip of the endoscope, not through the channel.
Ah, I see. A different deployment mechanism allows for a bigger, stronger clip.
Precisely. They provide a much more robust, durable closure for those tougher situations where a standard TSC might not be sufficient. It just shows how technology evolves to address the limitations of existing tools.
Makes sense. Okay, so we know they stop bleeds and close holes, but you mentioned these other uses, anchoring and marking. This is where, as the outline says, it gets really interesting.
It really does shift your view of this little clip. Let's talk anchoring first. The clip basically becomes a tiny internal tie-down. Think about stents, like those mesh tubes put in to keep passages open.
Yeah, they can sometimes move, right?
Yeah.
Migrate.
They can. Migration is a common problem. So you can actually use a TSC to clip the end of the stent to the lining of the gut, the mucosa, to pin it in place. Stops it from slipping down.
Clever. And what about that feeding tube example? The jejunal extension through a peg. That sounds quite specific.
It is quite specialized. So a peg tube goes directly into the stomach through the skin. Sometimes you need to feed even further down, bypassing the stomach into the jejunum, part of the small intestine.
Okay.
So a thinner tube, the jejunal extension, is threaded through the peg tube and down into the jejunum. But the problem is this thin tube often wants to coil back up into the stomach.
Ah, defeating the purpose.
Exactly. So the endoscopist can carefully place a clip to anchor the very tip of that jejunal tube to the wall of the small intestine right where it needs to be. It physically stops it from retracting back into the stomach. It's a neat little solution.
Wow. Okay. And anchoring for diagnostics, too. Manometry.
Yes, for colonic manometry. That measures pressure waves, muscle function in the colon. To get good readings, the catheter with the sensors needs to be held steady against the colon wall. A TSC can be used to gently fix it in place for the duration of the test.
Okay, so anchoring is one secondary role. What about marking? How does a clip act as a marker?
Well, the key here is that the clips are made of metal, usually titanium or stainless steel, and metal shows up really well on X-rays or CT scans. It's radiopaque.
Right, like a little beacon.
Exactly. So think about radiotherapy. If a patient needs radiation targeted at a specific spot where maybe a tumor was removed or where a small tumor remains,
How do you aim the beam precisely?
you mark the spot internally. The endoscopist places a clip right at the target site. Then, when the patient goes for radiation planning or treatment, that clip shows up clearly on the imaging, guiding the radiotherapist to focus the beam perfectly, sparing surrounding healthy tissue.
That's incredibly useful. And it helps surgeons, too, especially with minimally invasive surgery.
Absolutely, particularly for laparoscopic surgery. Imagine trying to find a small tumor deep in the pelvis, maybe between the rectum and the sacrum. It can be hard to pinpoint from the outside or even with the laparoscopic camera sometimes.
Yeah, orientation can be tough.
So the endoscopist goes in beforehand and places a clip at the tumor site. Sometimes they'll place a tattoo as well, but the clip gives a precise 3D location marker. During surgery, the surgeon can use intraoperative X-ray called fluoroscopy, see the clip, and know exactly where to direct their instruments or place their ports. It avoids unnecessary searching or dissection.
So it guides the surgeon's entry points and focus.
Precisely. And the last marking function is critical for interventional radiology. Let's say an endoscopist finds a nasty bleed, maybe deep in the small bowel, and they just can't stop it with clips or other endoscopic tools.
What happens then?
They might call in an interventional radiologist for an embolization.
Remind us what embolization is.
Sure. Embolization is where the radiologist threads a tiny catheter through the patient's blood vessels, navigating all the way to the specific artery that's feeding the bleeding site. Then they inject tiny coils or glue or particles to block that vessel, essentially cutting off the blood supply to the bleed.
Like plumbing, but internal.
Kind of, yeah. Now, the challenge for the radiologist is finding that exact tiny vessel among a whole network. So if the endoscopist couldn't stop the bleed but could get close, they'll deploy a clip near the bleeding site.
As a landmark.
Exactly. That radiopaque clip shows up on the radiologist's angiography screen. It acts like a bright X marks the spot, telling them precisely which branch vessel they need to target for the embolization. It makes the procedure faster, safer, and much more likely to succeed.
That range of uses, from stopping bleeds to guiding radiation and embolization, is amazing for such a seemingly simple device. But none of it works if you can't place the clip correctly. Let's talk technique. It involves two people, right? The endoscopist and an assistant.
Yes, absolute coordination is key. The device comes closed, the endoscopist holds it, thumb in the ring, fingers on the slider. Mechanically, it's pretty straightforward. Slide forward, the clip opens. Pull back or close the grip, the clip closes.
And critically, you mentioned they get a couple of practice shots, so to speak.
That's right. Most current clips aren't single shot anymore. You can typically open and close the jaws maybe 2 or 3 times to reposition and get the angle just right before you commit to the final deployment.
Because once it's deployed, it detaches.
It detaches from the delivery system and stays in the patient. There's no taking it back, so you have to be sure.
Which is why, as Dr. Raj's material emphasizes, there's this very strict 3-step command protocol between the endoscopist and the assistant.
Yes, it's crucial for safety and precision, especially under pressure. It standardizes the communication. It goes like this. 1, the endoscopist positions the clip and says, open the clip. The assistant then slides the mechanism to open the jaws.
Okay. Step 1, open.
2, the endoscopist adjusts the position, gets the tissue lined up, and says, close the clip. Now, the assistant closes the jaws, but, and this is vital, they do it slowly.
Slowly. Why is the slow part so important for closing? Seems like you'd want it fast.
The slowness is everything. It buys the endoscopist vital fractions of a second to make tiny adjustments with the scope or the clip catheter as the jaws are coming together. They're watching the tissue edges, aiming for what's called better approximation.
Making sure the edges line up perfectly before they're clamped.
Exactly. If the assistant snaps it shut too quickly, the endoscopist might lose that perfect alignment. Millimeters matter hugely here, so that slow, controlled closure is paramount.
Got it. And the third step.
3. Only when the endoscopist is fully satisfied with the position and the initial grasp of the tissue, they give the final command, deploy. The assistant then fully engages the mechanism, which locks the clip and detaches it from the wire.
Open. Close
Yeah.
in. Slowly. Deploy. Very clear. Okay, let's dig into that better approximation. This leads to the secret of success. Deep approximation. You mentioned millimeters matter. What does a failed or ineffective clip placement actually look like? How do you know it hasn't worked well?
Well, visually, you can often see two things wrong with a poor placement. First, there might be a visible gap between the tips of the two clip blades even after they're closed. They haven't fully come together.
So not a tight pinch.
Right. And second, you might see that the tissue is only grabbed or approximated, say, halfway along the length of the clip's blades. It's a shallow grip, only catching the very edge of the tissue.
And the consequence of that shallow grip.
The clip is likely to loosen or fall off prematurely, the defect might reopen, the bleeding might restart. Basically, the intended effect, the sealing or clamping, hasn't been achieved properly. It's a failed attempt.
So the goal, deep approximation, is the opposite of that.
Precisely. You want the clip blades to close completely, ideally with no gap between them, and you want them to have captured a substantial bite of tissue along their entire length, a deep, secure closure that brings the edges together firmly.
Okay, that makes sense as the goal. But achieving it sounds challenging, especially given what you said about adjustments during closure. The source material points to a specific technical challenge, doesn't it? Something about retraction.
Yes, this is a key insight into the physics of the device. As the mechanism closes the clip jaws, the entire clip assembly tends to retract slightly, pulling back towards the scope by maybe a few millimeters.
Oh, interesting. So as you're trying to close it on the target, the act of closing actually pulls it away from the target slightly.
Exactly. Think about it. If the endoscopist is holding the scope perfectly still and the assistant closes the clip, that retraction will pull the jaws away from the deep tissue they were aiming for. The result, you get that shallow, ineffective approximation we just talked about.
So how do skilled endoscopists deal with that? They must have a way to counteract it.
They do, and this is the crucial technique, the compensation maneuver Dr. Raju highlights. It's the secret sauce, really.
Okay, what is it?
While the assistant is performing that slow closure command step 2, the endoscopist has to actively compensate for the anticipated retraction.
How? By moving the scope.
Yes, either by gently pushing the entire endoscope forward a few millimeters, or sometimes by just advancing the clip's control wire slightly forward through the scope channel. It's a subtle forward push timed precisely with the clip closure.
So it's like a little dance.
Yeah.
As the clip naturally pulls back during closure, the endoscopist pushes forward just enough to keep the jaws engaged deeply with the target tissue.
That's exactly it. It's a dynamic, synchronized action. The assistant closes slowly, the clip starts to retract, and the endoscopist nudges forward to counteract that retraction, maintaining that deep bite.
Wow, that requires incredible finesse and coordination.
It absolutely does. But when they get that compensation right, the clip achieves full, deep approximation along its entire length. No gap, secure closure. That tiny forward push is often the difference between a clip that holds and heals and one that fails.
That really underscores the skill involved. So wrapping this up, what's the big picture here? We started with this small clip.
And we found it's a workhorse. Essential for stopping bleeds, closing defects, the primary stuff. But just as vital, maybe even more ingeniously used as an anchor for things like stents and feeding tubes, and as a radiopaque marker guiding radiation, surgery, even complex embolization procedures.
The versatility is stunning.
It really is. But the ultimate takeaway, I think, is how much success hinges on technique. That careful, slow, coordinated closure, coupled with the endoscopist's compensation maneuver to overcome retraction and achieve that deep approximation, that's the key to making this simple device perform complex, often life-saving tasks.
It really highlights the interplay between technology and human skill.
Mm.
So final thought to leave our listeners with. We've seen these clips evolve from simple metal designs to being used in these clever marking and anchoring ways. They're essentially tiny, passive, internal beacons or anchors.
Mm-hmm.
Given how technology is moving towards miniaturization and integration, could we see future iterations of these clips becoming more active, perhaps incorporating tiny batteryless sensors for monitoring or acting as delivery points for highly localized drugs, all potentially activated or read externally? Where might this foundational tech go next?
That's a fascinating question. The potential. Thinking about lots to consider there.
Indeed. Something for you to ponder until our next deep dive.